Well, everyone, the Meta Quest 3 has just came out and I finally got my hands on it, and I wanted to go and make a little bit of a comparison between the Meta Quest 2 and the Meta Quest 3. Now, there are definitely lots of similarities here, but there's also tons of differences, and I will definitely tell you, if you are new to the VR space and you don't have either headset, going up to the Meta Quest 3 might be the smartest thing to do. This is going to be a headset that's going to be basically it's going to be like this base model for a lot of different things going on in the future, probably for the next couple of years. And I don't think there's going to be a successor to this thing, at least for like 3 to 4 years. We have the Meta Quest Pro, we have the Meta Quest 3, and Meta is going to spend a bunch of money marketing this thing and making sure that all the apps and games and VR experiences that happen are going to be top tier for the Meta Quest 3. But they also know that a lot of people already own the Meta Quest 2, so they're also going to make sure all those games and experiences and everything like that are also going to work on the Meta Quest 2. So I would say from a bird's eye view, for a majority of things that you can do on the Meta Quest 3, you are going to be able to do that on the Meta Quest 2. If you want to save a lot of money, you could just go for the Meta Quest 2 and keep that for many more years to come too. So keep that in mind. I will tell you though, from my experience, getting the newer one is probably the better idea, but the Meta Quest 3 is still very, very good, and the Meta Quest 2 is just not as good, but still very good. Price tag wise, starting there, you are getting, a significantly cheaper console on the Meta Quest 2. Brand new, the Meta Quest 2 costs $299, but the Meta Quest 3 costs $499. So right there, that's a $200 difference. That may mean that for the average person, you may not want to go and spend that extra $200, and I would probably say the same thing. I think keeping your Meta Quest 2 might make a lot more sense, or buying a Meta Quest 2 might make more sense than buying the Meta Quest 3 from that perspective, from the price tag alone. That's a really, really big thing. Now, visually on the outside, there are some key differences here. So the first thing that you would probably notice is that the front of the Meta Quest 3 has these additional cameras that are kind of all up in your face rather than the Meta Quest 2. So with the Meta Quest 2, you will probably notice that this thing kind of has like a sleek design on the front. There are still cameras on the front of the Meta Quest 2, but they're just not as, they're just not as good. They don't give you as, good of a pass through as the Meta Quest 3. And also they're just not as good of a headset, if I'm being honest. But the Meta Quest 3 with those cameras, it is a much better, sleeker experience. I like the Meta Quest 3 because you are getting, not only those better cameras, but it is giving you full pass through, which actually looks a lot better. So that is something that I actually do like on the Meta Quest 3. If you were somebody who wants to go and, utilize those cameras a lot and do that kind of stuff, the Meta Quest 3 may actually end up giving you the better experience from that specific perspective right there. Now, speaking about the outside, there's still a lot of overlap by the way these things kind of look and everything, but there's also another difference. The Meta Quest 2 or the Meta Quest 3 for the matter, is 40% slimmer than the Meta Quest 2. That is, in my opinion, also another really big difference. You are going to be getting a much better, just a sleeker experience on the Meta Quest 3, which is massive. If I were somebody who wanted to go ahead and just get into the VR experience, one of my biggest complaints ever of the, Oculus Quest 2, but the Meta Quest 3, but the Meta Quest 2 in this specific, point, was the thickness and just how heavy that specific headset is. Now, with the Meta Quest 3, because this thing is so much significantly thinner, it makes me feel like it is just that much better of a console from that specific situation alone. So when you kind of think about it from that specific standpoint, I would look at something like the Meta Quest 3 as it kind of being the better device because it's slimmer. So that's another big thing to keep in mind too. The controls and everything on the outside are fairly the same. You have the same type of volume buttons. You're still getting a lot of overlap between these two as well, so don't get me wrong. But the thinness factor is a very, very big thing. Now you're still getting USB-C charging. You're still getting the ability of having the strap kind of change. I feel like the strap's up, and because the headset is so much thinner, it is kind of it's like a smoother experience. I feel like it's just easier to kind of use that type of, console over the, headset of the Meta Quest 2. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that the chipset inside, technically, it's kind of like stated as the same as far as I can tell from some of these spec sheets. So with the, Meta Quest 2, it had that Qualcomm Snapdragon XR2 chipset inside. With the Meta Quest 3, that one has the Qualcomm Snapdragon XR2 chip, but it's the second generation of that chipset. So Meta kind of claims that it's double the GPU processing power. I really don't think you would notice it, from a crazy high level, but you will be able to notice it from, playing those big applications. So if you're somebody who's playing those massive games and you were already kind of running out of, power, or you're already having issues or whatever, you are definitely going to be getting a better experience on something like the Quest 3 than on the Quest 2. So that's just one of those things to keep in mind. But with the newer processing power of the Meta Quest 3, you are getting higher resolution that you can power out on the Meta Quest 3. So the Quest 2, you can do 1832 by 1920 per eye. The Meta Quest 3 has now taken that up to 2064 to 2208 pixels per eye. That's a pretty big difference, and that's something that I actually do like on the Meta Quest 3. It's kind of I don't know if you notice it as soon as you boot it up, but it is nice to have cleaner and overall better visuals for the most part. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that with the headset, you are getting a little bit more RAM inside of that device. So the Meta Quest 2 had 2 gigabytes of RAM. The Meta Quest 3 now has 8 gigabytes of RAM. So going from 6 to 8 is a pretty big difference. And once again, that right there is going to be a pretty massive difference when you're looking at these types of devices. So personally for me, when I'm having a device like the Meta Quest 3, I'm already seeing so many reasons why that device is just so much better and probably the most important one that I can kind of think of. But I do like the little tiny things that the Meta Quest 3 also brings as well. I like the fact that this thing has full color pass-through. That's very nice. That is a very, very nice feature. I like that. It's not the biggest groundbreaking thing in the world, but it is a very nice feature. I like how the controllers are also a little bit improved as well. Now, they're still not rechargeable. I hope the next generation are actually rechargeable. That's a really nice feature, but the controls are supposed to be more accurate. They actually give you a little bit newer of a joystick experience, which is actually really nice. So that right there is another cool advantage. I also do like, this is kind of a small thing, but it's kind of a cool thing. With the Meta Quest 2, the top tier storage model of that specific console was 256 gigabytes. Now, the top tier storage model of the Meta Quest 3 is 512 gigabytes. So there's still about a $200 difference, I would say, or $150 difference going from the base model to the top tier of the Meta Quest 3. The Meta Quest 2, about a $130 difference, so not quite as big of a jump as the Meta Quest 3 going from their base model to their top tier model, but that is still a really nice touch as well. And when I look at something like the Meta Quest 3, I basically look at I look at that console and the headset as a good step from the Meta Quest 2. It is overall a really good upgrade, and this isn't, when I look at this device, it's not like I'm like, oh, this is what the Quest 2 should have been, but this is a good upgrade coming from the Meta Quest 2, which got a lot of headsets into a lot of people's hands. Now that the Meta Quest 2 has gone down in value a little bit, I do think the Meta Quest 2 for the average person out there is probably a good enough controller. I like that the controller of the Meta Quest 3 doesn't have that wind around it or the circular thing. I like a lot of stuff of the Meta Quest 3, but I still feel like the Meta Quest 2 is honestly good enough for a lot of people. And if it wasn't for the thickness and all that, I probably wouldn't notice, I wouldn't probably upgrade. But it is really nice that you are getting those types of differences with the Meta Quest 3. So what I will tell you is, if you have a Meta Quest 2, and if you use it all the time, I would just recommend going up to the Meta Quest 3. If you can, save some money, buy that, and then sell your Meta Quest 2. But if you don't want to do that, you can also keep your Meta Quest 2 for many, many years later and still have a very good console and a very good headset that is still going to be here and stand the test of time, probably for the next 3 to 5 years. So I feel like with the Meta Quest 3, there's not going to be the direct successor of this thing. I don't think we're going to be seeing the Meta Quest 4 anytime soon. So we got the Meta Quest 3, we got the Quest Pro, so there's still a lot of time before that next generation of headset comes out. So that's kind of how I kind of look at both these headsets and see how they kind of compare. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. The like button helps me so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.